Hey everyone. Today we got new parts for the second gen 2GR swap, including a completely plug and play wire harness. Let's talk about that. Welcome to the shop. So the big thing to talk about today is the wiring harness, but I'm going to walk you guys through how this all works and installing it in this car. So because that's a little bit drawn out, we're going to leave that for a little bit later, and there's going to be chapters, so feel free to skip ahead if you want. But first, let's talk about the other simpler things that are available for this swap. This one will excite a lot of people that already have their swap done, actually. This is a new drive-by-wire pedal assembly. This guy solves two major problems. One is the plastic pedal looks completely out of place in the Toyota MR2. Second is the plastic pedal is hypersensitive. Now, unfortunately, all of Toyota's new pedals are hypersensitive. So what I did is I took the IS250 pedal assembly, I made a longer pivot so that more travel here would equal the same amount of power. And now you've got something that is just a lot easier to control. You're not going to get as much RPM flare when you're trying to leave the stoplight. And just overall, it's a better solution. So, and of course, like all my other products, properly corrosion protected. The next part's just something to make the swap look even more OEM. So I've got these brackets. These are for mounting the ECU in the trunk. So let me put them on the ECU real quick and I'll show you guys. So here it is mounted on the ECU. You can see it's a very OEM looking solution. And here you can see it just reuses three mounting points, this one, and this one. And it mounts it at the perfect height so that this is level with this. And you put your trunk carpet in again, and now you don't have anything sticking out getting in the way of your trunk carpet. Also, it mounts the connector facing down, which is the way these connectors are supposed to be facing to, prevent water ingress. Now, because things are a little bit tight in here, you do have to put the connectors in before bolting the ECU to the wall. So we're not going to bolt this on right now. We'll get to that in a bit. And the last thing before we get to the wiring harness is I now sell a flywheel for the 2GR. So there's been complaints in the past about the two-piece flywheel. That's an aluminum flywheel with a steel insert. I agree. I prefer the all-steel flywheels myself. So since there wasn't one on the market, there is one now. Plus, it gets a nifty little logo this time. Which brings us, of course, to our wiring harness. So Paul Woods is the person that makes these. And essentially, this takes a third-gen Sienna harness and plugs into, you can see he managed to source the 3 chassis integration connectors. It provides the, it even provides the O2 relay because, if you've got a naturally aspirated car, you won't have the fan relay that I called out for this. Obviously plugs into the ECU. Start relay, it even, actually something really neat that it comes with, the 3-pin coolant sensor. It turns out there's a lot of these on the market that will provide a fine signal to the ECU, but for the dashboard, they always read a little high. So instead of leaving it up to you guys to make sure you get the right one, he provides it with it, and now you know it's right. And it plugs in to make it so that it's plug and play, right? It plugs in right near where the coolant sensor is, and you plug the previous from the Sienna harness right into here. The other nice things to note here is, obviously it's got the OBD2 port, but here is an actual proper connector for the chassis integration. Now, depending on which one you order, you might get, there's actually 3 variations for this connector, so you might get the different one. It has to be ordered by application. Here you can see right in your fuse box, it comes with these 2 connectors, right? So you don't even need to reuse any part of your factory engine wiring harness. And lastly, it even has this, which is what the ECU would normally, the ECU side of the wiring harness, because there's a couple wires on there that we care about. Now again, this is another one that'll change based on your application. So these are available for all of the combinations of second gen MR2s, and I believe Paul is even making them for some first and some third gens, but there's a link down in the description where you can get more details and you can buy the parts. Now, while this is plug and play, there is a little bit of wire loom work you do have to do. So the kit is actually provided with wire loom that you're going to need. It's provided with the correct kind of Tessa tape that's made for wiring harness work. Actually, this is not quite what Toyota uses. This is actually more what you'll find on German cars, but this is very high quality stuff. And it also comes with these extensions in case you end up using oxygen sensors that are too short. You've got extensions. These may or may not be necessary depending on your exact configuration of exhaust. And the mass airflow plug ends up being too far away to reach with the stock harness, so mass airflow extension. And then finally, because the stock ECU connector, the large connector, is really tricky to pass through the OEM hole that's in the trunk, here's a new grommet, and the kit even comes with the right size hole saw to install this. So really, this is as complete as it gets. So let's walk through and install it on here. So here we've got the MR2 that I did the swap for all the instructions in. Now, there's a couple things you want to do before you get started on installing the wiring harness. Essentially, all I've done here is I completely remove the wiring harness. When we get to the trunk in a second, you'll see the factory stuff is still there. The fuse box wires, everything is just gone as far as the electrical wiring goes, but otherwise, this is where you'd be when your swap is done. First thing you're going to do is install the coolant temperature sensor and tighten it down. Next thing we need to do is place our hole to run the wiring harness. So we're going to use the hole saw as a nice guide. Go ahead and pull the arbor out. And you'll want to get it here in the flat region. Now you'll notice as you try to do that, this gets in the way. You don't actually need to cut that off. You just need to knock it over to the side a bit. Now, if you want, you can use a spot weld cutter and take this whole thing out, because some of it will actually stay there, but the grommet will not have a problem with that extra height. So put this in here, basically find a spot that's as flat as possible. It's not going to be perfect. Mark your spot. Use a punch to start a pilot for the drill. I like to drill this hole without the hole cutter on there. It makes it easier to see to make sure that it's going to the right place. Now keep in mind, sheet metal is real thin here, so don't push too hard. Add your hole saw back on, and now you're committed. There we go. Your MR2 now has one more hole in it. Now go ahead and test your fit. That is not going anywhere. It's always a good idea to paint any exposed metal. Now, this is completely invisible to anybody. All right, next thing we have to do is prepare the wire harness. Now, the wire harness is harder to install with the engine in the car, so I would suggest you do this before installing the engine so you can install it on there, but it's far from impossible to do at this point, and since obviously my engine's already installed, that's what we're gonna do. So there's two things you need to do. You've got this branch right here, the one that's got the large ECU connector on it, and you've got this branch which has the 3 chassis integration connectors. We have to delume these, and one thing to note is this wire right here will fall out of the harness, and that doesn't matter, you don't need it. So let's go ahead and delume that. All right, and one last thing is you'll notice this is the starter wire. You can easily just leave that in there, tuck it in, but this pretty much comes out on its own, and it's only attached to one of these pins, and that pin is not used. So you can just cut this off. You don't need to do anything with it, just cut it off. All right, and that's all we do for now. So let's go ahead and get this installed on the engine. now you take the grommet and you pass the connector through it. We're going to need to pass all of this through it, but always start with the biggest stuff first. All right, and now through the hole that we added. Notice we kept the power wire out here. And now we take the new harness, and we're going to start in the engine bay, and we're going to go through. You're going to start with the ECU connector. And the way you get it through is you open the lock like that, and then you feed it through. Let me get you a better angle on that. Then we hook up our ECU. Now it's just a question of hooking these three up. And don't forget, now we have these two also. Now this should all clean up nicely in here, but we will have to undo this again, so we'll leave it like that for now and head back into the engine bay. And now we just continue hooking everything up. This lead right here, we have to straighten that out. Right. Not only do you have to straighten it out, unfortunately you do have to file it out just a little bit because Toyota made this a 6x5 slot instead of a 6mm hole. Now it's important, just take a second and file this thing. If you try to drill it, it's just gonna wad up the wire. There you go. Attach it to the firewall right here. Okay, and then the extensions. For me, the rear one reached, but the front one didn't, so I'm only going to use one of these. And the mass airflow, of course. And now we need the mass airflow pipe itself. And plug it into the mass airflow. All right, we should be done. Let's get the camera out. Now at this point, it's important to note, we still need to pull it out to do the final looming, loom and tape. But we've spent less than an hour and everything is hooked up at this point. Let me go hook up the ground terminal back on the battery and see if she fires up. All right, here goes nothing. All right, well, you probably heard that. It wanted to fire. There was probably air in the fuel lines, and my battery's a little bit low. So I'm gonna wait for the battery charger to do its thing, and you guys will see me in just a second. As you can see with the new shirt, today is tomorrow, and I put a fresh tank of gas in the car as well as charged the battery, and I resisted the urge to start it off camera. So let's do the next start on camera and see if she starts. I'm pretty sure she will. All right, well, there it is. So it took about an hour to install, and we are now good to go. Now, there's two things that I do have to talk about that, unfortunately, this is not, I guess you can say, this is not 100% plug and play. The first thing is, if you have a turbo chassis, you do have to jump over the fuel pump relay, which will put it into low speed mode unless you send a signal to it. So that's this connector right here, and you have to jumper these pins together. So you jump those, that's right here, well, okay. That's right to the right of the fuse box as you're looking the car from the back. And if that's not there, it's because the car is naturally aspirated. And then finally, the last thing we need to do is we do need to connect 2 wires together. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and bring you guys in. We're going to pull this back apart so that we can add the tape, the wire loom and the tape. And we'll show you kind of how I would do that. And at the same time, I'll also pull out that transmission connector and I'll be able to show you exactly which wires need to be bridged together. Now, it's important to note, if you don't feel confident in your skills connecting those wires together, that they're going to stay together, what you're doing there is you're putting the ECU into drive instead of in no mode, which it's assuming park if you have it in no mode. And that gives a slightly different throttle response curve. So if it fails, it's not a big deal. You're going to get a fault code. It's going to say Prindle position sensor error, and it's going to keep letting you drive. I mean, you could drive thousands of miles with it like that. There's not going to be any performance downsides. The throttle response is just going to be just a touch, just a touch of lag. Most people don't notice it. Some people do. Let me go ahead and take that apart and let's loom it up. All right, so now we need to get back down to that wiring loom so that we can add some protective sleeve and tape it up. And now what we want to do is, without moving that to a different position, we want to lock in place the shape of the harness. All right, now we're going to pull the wire out of the trunk. And with it in this position, we tape it up and add the loom. Now, when you've got a wire exiting like this, it's nice to cut a little relief. Make sure you don't get a wire at the same time. All right, now we're going to shove that back in through the hole. All right, so next we want to take this wire here, plug, and pins 1 right here and 16 right here. Oh, I'll put a diagram on screen. And you want to connect those together. And this plug doesn't get used for anything, so we can just cut the wires off. Now I'm going to crimp these together, but as I said, this isn't going to lead to failures even if this disconnects. So use whatever method you find to be more comfortable with. All right, and then we'll tuck it back in here and just hide it away. The fuel, that's this plug right here. And you have to connect this pin here and this pin here. Again, I'll put a diagram on screen. Now, I've already done it, actually in exactly the same way that I just did the other one when I did the swap earlier for this engine. So I can't show you doing that, but it's the same thing. And again, that's only needed on the turbo model. So that's it. We're pretty much done. We just need to put the harness back together, put the intake back on, we're good to go. So let me do that real quick. Now, next thing you're going to want to do that I'm actually not going to show on video, this is the throttle pedal cable. You can see that's what plugs in here. There's a hole on the front left of the engine bay there. You can go through and just go along the rocker panel and go to the front of the car with that. So the other thing here is this wire is a little bit long. I actually will talk to Paul. This is the prototype harness right here. So some of the stuff's a little bit too long because he didn't have the car in place to be able to do this. So these wires will be a bit more appropriately sized when you get this harness. All right, we're done in the engine bay. Let's go back to the trunk and finish that up. And then this one here can just peek out over your carpet. This is your diagnostic port. And there you go. Just this will tuck in there right nicely behind the carpet. Let's just let's get one more test fire, make sure that it still runs, and we should be good to go. All right, and we're good. It looked like it had a bit of a stumble at idle there. I think the motor just hasn't appreciated sitting. Probably need to get it up to temperature a couple times and let it clear its throat. But as you can see, there's no radiator cap on it right now, so we won't be doing that. But either way, it runs. And yeah, so I gotta say, that was the simplest wiring job I have ever done. So hopefully this helps you guys along, and everybody can have a running 2GR 2nd Gen MR2. All right, that's all I've got for today. Links for everything down in the description. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.